In this lesson, we're going to talk about operations with rational numbers. So let's first talk about what a rational number is. A rational number is a number that can be made by dividing two integers, and it comes from the word ratio. You can actually see the word ratio in the word rational. Now, let's actually talk about what a rational number is. I want to look at this little chart at the bottom. This may be familiar to you. This is the real numbers Venn diagram, where all of these numbers in this green box are known as real numbers. And these are basically just numbers that you've learned about all the way up until this point in time. And later on, you'll learn about another number system. But for right now, what we're going to be focusing on is the left side of this chart. All of the numbers that are held in this big bubble here to the left. I don't want to leave out irrational numbers like pi, but we're not going to talk about those today. So, rational numbers consists of numbers that are integers, whole numbers, natural numbers, fractions, decimals, all those different types of numbers. I have some examples up here at the top for you to look at. You can see that the number 1/2 is rational because it's a fraction. You can see that the number 0.75 is rational because it's a decimal. And remember, most decimals can be made into fractions, just like this one. This one can be made into 3/4. The number 1, well, that's rational because you can write it as 1/1. The number 2, that's rational because you can write it as 2/1. 2.12, yes, that's the decimal, but you could write it as 212/100. And then this last one here, -6.6, well, that's rational as well because you could write it as -66/10. So anytime you can write the number as a fraction, that means that it's rational. So having that said, we're going to be working with rational numbers today and working with the operations. So let's go ahead and work some of these problems. So you can see that there's a little indicator over off to the right that says that you can use a calculator. So I will be showing you how to do these problems on Desmos, along with showing you how to do these by hand. So really you could use either one of these tools to help you. So I always like to do the problem by hand first. So let's go ahead and look at this first one. -1/2 plus 5/4. So we're adding two fractions or two rational numbers together. To add fractions, we have to make a common denominator. So our common denominator for these two rational numbers is going to be 4. So let's go ahead and make that a 4. And I see that the 4 on the right side, I didn't change anything. So I'm not going to go ahead and change that 5 there. And I am going to have to change the -1. Oh, and by the way, anytime you have a negative out front, always bump it to the top. So for this one, I had to multiply 2 times 2. So I'm going to have to multiply the top by 2, giving me -2. So let's go ahead and add the numerators. -2 plus 5 is +3. And my denominators stay the same. So my answer is 3/4. Now, to do that in the calculator, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to go ahead and over on Desmos, I'm going to show you how to make that happen. So I'm going to start with -1. Oh, let me go ahead and just minimize this a little bit. There we go. All right, -1 divided by 2, bump over to the right here, plus 5 divided by 4. And I'm going to press the blue button to give me equals. Well, you can see that it's 0.75, but if I click this little button here off to the right, it'll give me 3/4. So it gives me the same answer. Let's try the second one. All right, this second one, -5/6 minus 2/3. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and take that negative and just kind of bump him up to the -5. And when subtracting integers, or rational numbers, we have to make a common denominator. So let's make our common denominator of 6. And I'm going to leave -5 the same because nothing happened to him. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change him to a 4 because I multiplied by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract these. Using my integer skills, -5 minus 4 leaves me with -9. And that's going to be divided by 6 because when you subtract rational numbers, you don't change that common denominator. And if I simplify these two numbers, that's going to simplify down to -3/2. Okay, let's go ahead and do that in the calculator now. So I have negative 5 divided by 6 minus 2/3. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And again, it gives me the decimal of negative 1.5, but I can go ahead and change it into a fraction of negative 3/2. Okay, oh, and you might be wondering, can I leave my answer as a decimal? You may, but usually when you're working with fractions, I personally like to leave my answer as what they started with. So notice that I'm starting with fractions. I usually like to leave my answer as a fraction as well. Okay, let's go ahead and try this next one. 1 1/6 times negative 3/5. So this time I have a mixed number that I need to turn into an improper fraction. So as a reminder how to do that, we're going to take 6 times 1, which is 6, and I'm going to add 1. So that's going to actually give me 7/6. And I'm going to multiply that by negative 3/5. So I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite it like this. All right, multiplication is my favorite operation because we just multiply straight across. So 7 times negative 3 is negative 21 divided by 6 times 5, which is 30. Now, both of these numbers happen to be divisible by 3. So I'm going to divide the top by 3, and that's going to give me negative 7. And I'm going to divide the bottom by 3, which would give me 10. Simplifying that down to negative 7/10. Now, another way you could have simplified that if you didn't like that simplifying process is this. This is kind of a cool little trick. So looking back over here, where we just kind of wrote the question down, if you notice that numbers that are diagonal from each other are divisible by one another, you can cancel them out. For example, negative 3 is divisible, 6 is divisible by negative 3. So I can actually cancel these out and make this a negative 1, and I can make this a 2. And you'll notice that it kind of simplifies things down, because now if I multiply 7 times negative 1, that gives me negative 7. And if I take 2 times 5, that simplifies down to 10. I know that was a little tricky, but feel free to pause the video and go back and take a look at that simplifying process if you happen to want to use it. Okay, let's go ahead and do it on the calculator here. So 1 1/6, so 1 and actually I'm going to go ahead and let me delete that. I'm going to go ahead and start with my improper fraction. So 7 divided by 6, and then I'm going to go ahead and times that by negative 3/5. So negative 3 divided by 5. And you can see my answer is negative 0.7, which is negative 7/10. All right, let's look at this last problem on this page. All right, 7/8 divided by negative 3/2. So I always like to remember the little tool, keep, change, flip. So for this one, I'm going to keep 7/8 the same. I'm going to change division to multiplication, and then I'm going to flip over my fraction. So right now, if I bump him up, he's negative 3/2, but I'm going to change him to 2/3. And then let's go ahead and use that simplifying process that I showed you earlier. So you can see that the 2 and the 8 are both divisible by 2. So I could actually cancel him out and say, okay, well, 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. So basically what you just did is you simplified before you finished the problem. So 7 times 1 will give us 7, and 4 times negative 3 will give us negative 12. And of course, negative 7/12 is fully simplified. Now, if you didn't simplify, here's what you would have gotten. You would have gotten 7 times 2, which is 14, and 8 times negative 3, which is negative 24. And you would have had to simplify that down to 7/12. All right, let's go ahead and put that right in the calculator here. So I'm going to write in 7 divided by 8, and then I'm going to say divided by, and it might look a little different, but that's okay, negative 3 divided by 2. So a lot of divisions, but you can see that it gives us this decimal, which we can turn right into the fraction there. All right, so I showed you how to do all of these problems by hand and using Desmos. So either way you can do. Now let me show you some problems that have some different types of rational numbers. For this one, you can see that I have some decimals. So this is where you want to fully go over to the Desmos calculator. So let's go ahead and look at putting these into the calculator. This first one, 17.5 divided by -5. Well, both of those are rational numbers. So let's go ahead and put it into Desmos. 17.5 divided by -5. And that will give us -3.5, or the fraction of -7/2. So I'm going to go ahead and write that answer in, -7/2. All right, let's try another one. 0.09 minus -0.4. So I'm going to go ahead and put that right into Desmos just the way that I see it. Minus, and I'm going to use little parentheses here. So -0.4. There we go. And my answer is going to be 1.3. And you can see that I could write that as a fraction, 13/10 if I want. So I'll write that as 13/10. But like I said earlier, I like to leave it in the form that it starts in. So if you wanted to leave this in the form of 1.3, that's perfectly fine as well. I'll write them both ways. Okay, I've got two more for us here. 3/4 times -0.4. So here we go. 3 divided by 4, and I'm going to bump over to the right, and parentheses, -0.4. Close my parentheses, and my answer is -0.3 or -3/10. So again, either one of those numbers is perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and write it both ways just so you can see it. So either one that you want to write it is perfect. Okay, and the last one here. 1/2, and I'm going to divide that by 0.25. All right, go ahead and press enter, and oh, I don't know if that came out right. That did not come out right. Let me go ahead and try that again. So 1 divided by 2, I'm going to bump that over. There we go. Divided by 0.25. That's much better. See how it looks a little bit different. And press enter. And my answer is 2. So there you have it. You can do these by hand or you can do these in the calculator, either one. Personally, I like to recommend that if you're only working with fractions like you are up at the top, be sure that you're feeling comfortable with how to make those, how to work through those operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division with those rational numbers. All right, that brings us to the end of our lesson on operations with rational numbers.